Have you ever noticed how the moment you stop chasing someone, suddenly they start paying more attention? It's almost like the second you stop trying to prove your worth, that's when they realize yours. And if you've ever been in a dynamic with someone avoidant, you'll know exactly what I mean. In relationships, especially those with an avoidant partner, there's a painful cycle. The more you lean in, the more they pull away. And the more you pull away, the more they start to lean in. But here's the secret. There are 3 subtle shifts that, when you make them, can flip the script entirely. These aren't about manipulation. They're about reclaiming your power and showing up with value. When the anxious partner does these 3 things, something profound happens. The avoidant begins to feel the loss of what they took for granted. They realize they can't coast on distance anymore. They realize your presence is a gift, not a guarantee. When you find yourself in a dynamic with someone avoidant, the natural instinct, especially if you lean anxious, is to close the gap. You feel them pulling away, and it triggers that sense of panic. What if I lose them? What if they don't care anymore? So you respond by leaning in harder. You send more texts to check if they're okay. You try to initiate more plans, more conversations, more reassurance. You over-explaining yourself, hoping they'll understand that all you want is connection. And yet, instead of this making them feel safe, it pushes them further away. It's like trying to hug someone tighter when they're already gasping for air. That's the paradox. The more you pursue, the less they can breathe and the more they run. Stopping the pursuit feels terrifying at first. Your brain tells you, if I don't chase, they'll forget about me. If I don't explain myself, they'll misunderstand and leave. But the reality is the opposite. When you stop pursuing, you create space for the other person to step forward. You send a silent but powerful message. I value myself enough not to beg for your attention. I'm not going to keep proving my worth. You're either going to see it or you're going to miss out. That shift changes the energy between you and them. Instead of constantly signaling, I need you to validate me, you're signaling, I'm secure enough to let you come to me when you're ready. Think of it like this. If someone is constantly chasing you down a hallway, you'll keep running just to get away. But if they stop, if they lean casually against the wall and let you keep walking, at some point you notice the silence behind you. You turn around. You wonder why they're not there anymore. The avoidant is wired to crave independence and space. So when you give that space without resentment, without dramatics, it's disarming. They suddenly feel the absence of your presence. They notice the quiet. They realize the effort you used to make is no longer guaranteed. What makes this so powerful is that it's not about manipulation, it's about balance. Pursuing is a form of imbalance. You're carrying the entire weight of the connection, trying to convince someone to stay. When you stop, you're essentially saying, I trust myself enough to not chase. I trust that if this person values me, they'll make an effort too. That confidence is magnetic. It changes how the avoidant experiences you. Instead of seeing someone who clings, they start to see someone who is strong, grounded, and self-respecting. Of course, pulling back doesn't mean going cold or pretending you don't care. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about dropping the excess, the texts sent just to soothe your own anxiety, the explanations that go in circles, the constant reaching out when they're not meeting you halfway. It's about replacing pursuit with presence. You show that you're still open, still available for connection, but not at the cost of your peace. That subtle change creates curiosity in the avoidant. They begin to realize what it feels like not to be pursued, and often that's the moment they start to lean in. When you've been caught in the anxious-avoidant cycle, it's easy to slowly shrink your life down to the size of the relationship. You start canceling plans with friends because you don't want to miss their call. You let hobbies fall by the wayside because you're worried they'll think you're too busy for them. You find yourself prioritizing their schedule over your own, bending and adjusting in the hope they'll feel closer to you. But what happens when your whole world revolves around them? They start to feel like you're orbiting their life instead of living your own, and to someone avoidant, that closeness can feel suffocating. The irony is that in giving up your independence to try to keep them, you make them want to run further away. Reclaiming your space is about flipping that pattern. Instead of structuring everything around them, you start bringing the focus back to yourself. You revisit the activities, that used to bring you joy before the relationship. You re-engage with your friendships, plan time for family, and rediscover what lights you up outside of this connection. This isn't about being dismissive or punishing. It's about showing yourself and them that your life is full and valuable, whether or not they're plugged into it every second. When you do this, the avoidant no longer feels like they're being smothered, and they start to notice the richness you bring into the relationship when you're fulfilled in your own right. There's an undeniable energy shift that happens when you reclaim your space. You become more magnetic because you're no longer signaling, "I need you to be the source of my happiness." Instead, you're radiating, "I'm happy within myself, and I'm choosing to share that with you." This kind of energy is what pulls people in. It makes them curious. It makes them appreciate your presence rather than take it for granted. Avoidants, who are often sensitive to feeling pressured, suddenly feel less burdened because you're not looking at them as your only source of connection. They start to lean forward when they realize you're not sitting by the phone waiting for them to decide your day. Another powerful part of reclaiming your space is the message it sends about your standards. When you prioritize your passions, your work, your personal goals, you're saying without words, "My life is meaningful. I have things that matter deeply to me." This makes any time you do spend together feel intentional, not desperate. It changes the rhythm of the relationship. You're not waiting around for scraps of attention. You're inviting them into a life that's already vibrant. That shift makes them realize they're not the center of your world, and paradoxically, that's when they often start fighting for a spot in it. The truth is, people respect what they can't control. When you reclaim your space, you remind them you're not dependent, you're not clinging, you're someone with their own identity, their own value, their own full and expansive life. And for the avoidant, who often fears being engulfed, that's not just attractive, it's safe. Boundaries are one of the most misunderstood parts of relationships, especially when emotions are high. Many people think boundaries are about being rigid, cutting people off, or building walls. In reality, they're simply about clarity of what you're comfortable with, what you're not, and how you expect to be treated. When you're in a dynamic with someone avoidant, boundaries can feel almost impossible to hold. The anxious part of you worries that if you assert a need, they'll run. So instead, you let things slide. You accept the last-minute cancellations, the vague communication, or the lack of effort, hoping that by being endlessly accommodating, you'll keep them close. But this strategy backfires. The avoidant doesn't see your silence as kindness. They see it as permission. And the more permission you give for them to show up inconsistently, the more they take your presence for granted. Setting calm boundaries changes that dynamic. When you state your needs clearly and without anger, you shift the entire tone of the relationship. You're no longer pleading for them to step up or exploding in frustration when they don't. You're simply saying, "This is what works for me, and this is what doesn't." It's direct, it's calm, and it leaves no room for confusion. This might sound simple, but the impact is profound. The avoidant suddenly sees that your peace of mind is not negotiable and that you won't bend yourself out of shape just to keep them comfortable. What makes calm boundaries so powerful is the absence of emotional chaos. When someone anxious sets boundaries in a reactive state, it can come across as an ultimatum, a plea, or an outburst. That usually confirms the avoidant's fear of being trapped or controlled, and they retreat further. But when the boundary is delivered in a steady, grounded tone, no raised voice, no dramatic threat, it lands differently. It communicates strength. It communicates self-respect. And most importantly, it communicates that your happiness doesn't rely solely on them complying. You're not trying to force them into changing. You're showing them the standards by which you live. The other hidden power of calm boundaries is how they shift your own sense of security. Every time you set a boundary and honor it, you teach yourself that your needs matter. You remind yourself that you don't have to abandon your values to keep someone's affection. That inner alignment makes you more centered, less reactive, and less desperate for scraps of validation. The avoidant begins to notice that energy. They see you're not afraid of their distance. You're not afraid of walking away if the situation doesn't align with what you want. And ironically, that fearlessness makes them more willing to step forward, Calm boundaries are not about pushing the other person away. They're about creating a healthier middle ground. They stop you from losing yourself in the pursuit of closeness, and they give the avoidant a chance to meet you from a place of respect rather than resistance. The moment they realize you're not someone who tolerates endless excuses or half-hearted effort, they also realize that being with you requires presence, not avoidance. And that's when they start valuing you differently. There is a profound difference between needing someone and choosing someone, and that distinction can completely transform the dynamic with an avoidant partner. When you come from a place of need, every action, every word, every silence feels loaded. You're constantly scanning for reassurance, trying to make sure they won't leave, seeking signs that they care. This creates an undercurrent of pressure in the relationship because the avoidant senses that their presence is being relied on for your emotional stability. To them, it feels heavy. The more you need them to show up, the more suffocated they feel, and their instinct is to pull back. That's not because they don't care, but because they associate closeness with losing freedom. When you shift into a place of choosing rather than needing, the entire energy changes. Choosing says, I am already complete. I don't need you to fill a hole in my life, but I enjoy what you bring into it. That mindset is liberating for both people. For you, it means you're no longer hanging your self-worth on whether or not they validate you. For them, it means they don't feel trapped under the weight of your expectations. They can relax into the connection rather than running from it. This choice-based energy feels light, attractive, and empowering. It shows up in subtle ways. For example, if they cancel plans, instead of spiraling into panic or anger, you can simply use that time for something fulfilling in your own world. You don't need them to rescue your evening. You have a life you enjoy. If they don't text back right away, you don't chase with multiple follow-ups. You choose to invest your attention elsewhere until they do respond. When they finally see your reply, it doesn't come from desperation, but from calm presence. I value myself and my time, and I'm choosing to share it with you. That difference is magnetic because it frames the relationship as an addition to your life, not the center of it. This shift also communicates an unspoken standard you are with them because you want to be, not because you fear being alone. And that subtle change makes them realize your value in a new light. If you're choosing them, it means others don't automatically have that privilege. It places them in a position of earning your time, not assuming it. This isn't about playing games or withholding affection. It's about embodying the truth that love is most powerful when it's a choice, not a dependency. Avoidants are often most drawn to people who respect their independence, and when you operate from choice, you model that independence for yourself. You're not clinging, you're not pleading, you're extending an invitation to share in your life. And when they realize that you're strong enough to stand on your own yet still want them beside you, that's when the fear of closeness begins to dissolve. They no longer see intimacy as a trap, but as something they're fortunate enough to be chosen for. Absence is one of the most powerful teachers in relationships, yet it's the one tool many anxious partners are most afraid to use. The thought of pulling back or not being immediately available feels risky, almost dangerous, because the anxious mind whispers, if I'm not right there, they'll forget about me. If I don't answer straight away, they'll move on. So instead, you do the opposite. You stay overly accessible. You reply instantly. You rearrange your day to fit theirs. You remain on standby in case they reach out. At first, this might feel like love and loyalty, but to an avoidant, it often registers as predictability. And predictability, without any sense of scarcity, can quickly turn into complacency. Letting someone experience your absence is not about punishing them or playing games. It's about reminding them that your presence is not automatic, that your attention is something to be cherished, not assumed. When you're not instantly available, the avoidant starts to notice the gaps. They feel the contrast between what it was like to always have your energy on tap versus what it feels like when that energy is no longer guaranteed. It creates a subtle longing, an awareness that they miss what they once took for granted. This is where realization often strikes. They recognize that your presence in their life adds a richness they don't want to lose. Absence works because it creates perspective. When you're always there, always saying yes, always showing up regardless of how little they invest, they don't have the opportunity to reflect on your value. It's like breathing air. You don't think about how vital it is until it's gone. But when you step back, even gently, the avoidant feels the void. They notice the silence where your voice used to be. They catch themselves wondering what you're doing instead of waiting around. And in that wondering, they reconnect to the reality that your presence is a privilege. Practically speaking, allowing absence might mean you don't respond to every text the moment it arrives. It might mean you're not always free to reschedule when they cancel last minute. It might mean you're out living your life, spending time with friends, pursuing your passions, being fully engaged in your world, so you're naturally not available 24/7. The difference is that your absence isn't about withholding affection, it's about creating space for mutual effort. You're showing them that while you're open to connection, you're not on constant standby waiting to be chosen. This shift often jolts the avoidant out of complacency. They begin to realize that the steady stream of attention they assumed would always be there has slowed. And with that realization comes a deeper awareness. If they want access to your presence, they need to step forward, they need to contribute, they need to make an effort. In this way, absence doesn't push them away. It pulls them in by reawakening their appreciation for what it feels like to have you close. When you stop over-pursuing, when you reclaim your space, when you set calm boundaries, when you shift from needing to choosing, and when you allow them to experience your absence, you're no longer stuck in the anxious-avoidant trap. Instead, you're standing firmly in your value. You're reminding them, not through words, but through action, that love with you is a gift, not a guarantee. And often, it's in those moments that the avoidant begins to wake up. They start to realize what they've been risking, and they see you with fresh eyes. The beauty of this shift is that it's not about changing them. It's about changing how you show up. And in doing so, you naturally change the energy of the relationship. Whether they rise to meet you or not, you've already won. Because you've reclaimed your power, your peace, and your sense of self-worth. Thank you for listening. Thank you for showing up for yourself. And thank you for being brave enough to grow in love rather than shrink for it. Take these truths with you, live them with confidence, and remember, you deserve a relationship that feels like freedom, not fear.